We are finally live, and this is take two because we did the first 8 minutes without hitting the big blue button that says "Go Live." So here we are, finally live, and excited for episode two, where we're going to discuss the intersection of product design and brand experience. I'd like to thank Howie, my partner, for flagging this on Slack. Are you going live? So here we are. So yeah, episode two. I've got an exciting guest today that I found through her amazing content on LinkedIn. She's got an amazing way in which she tells product stories and how with case studies, product stories, and there's a lot of learning, and she does a great do it in a really fun way and easy to digest. So now, without further ado, my guest for episode two, Katie Deloso. My dyslexia is terrible. Anyways, I am excited. She was formerly in San Francisco as a product designer and now in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have asked her on the show because we share a passion for digital products as well as brand and the intersection of the two. And she has a partner at Nurture, and she has been integrating design and behavioral science to enhance digital interactions and impacting over 250 projects over the years. Her strategic vision has been instrumental in developing brand and user experience strategies that not only attract, but also retain customers through compelling narratives and functional design. So welcome, Katie, to the show.
Hello again.
Hello again. Take two. All right. Still, my dyslexia still gets in the way when I try to read these notes. All right.
It's Deloso. It actually means of the bear in Spanish.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me. As I mentioned in the introduction, I found you through the great content that you produce on LinkedIn. There are not only delightful and fun, but also a great user experience in the way in which you deliver some really good lessons in not just product design, but on things to do, but also historical. And I like the fact that you like to have a little fun with it. And they're great. And so for those that haven't found her, she's down in the invite. You can see. I would say go ahead and follow her. Check out her content. She's got a whole library of great stuff. This one just came live yesterday, which is on the pivot from Play-Doh.
Yeah, this was a cool story that I ran across about how Play-Doh basically pivoted. It was not for children originally. It was actually used to clean the wallpaper back in the day when you had coal to heat your homes. It didn't have all the fun colors and all that stuff, but it was used to basically take the soot off the walls. And then as, our heating sources changed, their market started to get smaller and smaller, and they ended up pivoting. A teacher had been using it instead of like modeling clay, and she had basically said, hey, this is a really cool use for it. And they actually doubled down on it and ended up, testing it out and looking at how people might use Play-Doh as a toy, which I think is really interesting and something that I advocate for in the product design, is to actually watch how somebody would use something in user research in order to understand how we can better form the product for what somebody's actually trying to accomplish. Anyway, so I love taking these weird stories and applying them back to products, digital products anyway.
I mean, there's so much data that talks to the fact that storytelling is a great way in which to retain the information, and so making it more intriguing, I think, is a great way to go. And there's tons of great takeaways. So I actually thought when I saw the title card that it was a current pivot because of all of the digital move to digital. So I was a bit of a, and then when I looked in, I was like, where are they going next? But I imagine that they will continue to be in the physical world and not make the mistake that Lego made when they went digital, which was to create side-scrolling shooter games, as opposed to being able to capture the imagination of blocks in a room, because that right. Minecraft ultimately did do. And I think they really missed that same mapping of physical to the digital space, big time, because I have 3 generations of Lego in our box at home. Three generations, all the way back to the 60s from my uncle, gave it to me and my brother, and they still all snap together.
Oh, wow.
But I watched my son when he was young play with Lego, the new stuff, the old stuff, all in one thing in his imagination. But when he switched over to digital and went into Minecraft, I saw that there was an exact parallel of what was going on in his mind and his interactions of how he was building things from these blocks. And it was very rudimentary by design, and it has stayed for the most part, I think, as rudimentary, but it's still huge with kids. And I think it was Lego's big miss, not just like thinking in those lines, that they could move into the digital space at the same, experience of discovery and building, but that they also could have been the one that acquired them and done that good. So, and it's I know my friends' kids now that are younger are still in there, and it's still booming. So
Yeah, my kids
interesting
are still
stuff.
playing with Play-Doh, so, you know.
Your kids play with Play-Doh?
Yeah, I mean, I have a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a baby, so.
Well, keep the screens away from those a little longer than maybe than I did. Awesome. So great content, and you bring such knowledge to it. So tell me how you've formed your opinion of this intersection. Your agency does both do brand and does product design,
Yep.
and I don't see that a ton, to be frank, but I think it's important. That's why we created the show, is that as we move forward, that the products now are becoming the brand, and a lot of times startups, the product is the brand. They haven't thought much about it, and it's ultimately that experience develops into it. So give us a little bit of a history of how you got here, and yeah.
Yeah, gosh, so way back when, 15 years ago, I was actually working on a startup company, which my co-founder, now founded back then, and I was working on content and user research, for them. They basically did what Gmail's priority inbox does today, using machine learning to like sort between important and not important emails. I actually remember training the model and saying, yes, this is important. No, that's not important. So today with, LLMs, that looks like child's play, but back then, it was cool stuff. Um, that company was acquired by AOL for their Project Phoenix, which I joke never rose from the ashes. And we ended up embedding inside of the accelerator that company had gone through. We had a tiny little office in the back, and just kind of were starting to play with those companies. We wanted to help them out. We didn't know what our next thing was going to be, and kind of organically ended up growing nurture from that, and started working with series A, B, C companies as we got referred out from these much smaller early stage companies. And then, you know, a lot of times we were brought in to work on either the product experience or the brand. And they naturally just kind of inform each other, right? Because the brand really sets the expectation of what is this, what am I about to go through? What is this? Why should I care? I love the jobs to be done framework. So like, what job am I hiring this for? Um, and the product itself is the experience. So it's when that expectation meets the experience. Did they have the experience that they expected? If they don't, right, you either need to adjust the brand or the product to reflect what the brand is telling you that they're going to do. We've all been in the movie theater, right? When we've seen a preview for a movie and we're like, oh, that looks like it's going to be amazing. You get all excited, you go to the movie and you're like, oh, they showed you the best 3 clips. And wow, that was a real letdown, right? So that's a lot of what we try to think about in how to integrate that messaging into the product experience as well, so that everything feels like a cohesive, um, basically like a brand promise, right? You're fulfilling that brand promise in the product.
Yeah. Historically, there's been such an emphasis on the typical brand strategy with all the pillars and the story, the brand story, and those are all still critical. But essentially, they were quite disconnected from whatever the
Mhm.
product or service was and there's a lot of intention around how a brand should be felt, how a brand should be seen and heard, as it were, with voice. And then a product, whether digital or not, would get made and it would go to market. And then you've got to bring the two together somehow after the fact. And I think that those, we talked about it last week, those that will succeed in the future will include in their plan, not just have that brand strategy deck under your arm and go to
Mhm.
market, but also what are our clients or customers going to experience with the product and have it deeply connected. Now, when you get hired to come in to either start something that new or to do an improvement, do you find that the coming together of the brand and the product, you're hired to do both, or are you usually hired for one or the other? And then does that spill into the fixing or bringing a connection from from the brand to the product?
Generally, I would say most people bring us in for one or the other because there's usually a need, right? It's, "Hey, we're ready to go to version 2 of our product. We need help on the experience for it," or, "We need to really think about how we want to be perceived from a brand standpoint. We need a new website." Generally, like, that comes in separately. And usually they end up trickling into one another, right? Where we're especially when you're looking at the product experience, a lot of what I'm thinking about is how does this connect back to what you're telling them on the brand side? And how do we take that voice from the marketing side and inject it into the product so you feel like this is a streamlined experience from the very beginning all the way through when you're using it, so that when somebody is actually has been using the product and they go and recommend it to their friend, that they reflect back the way that you would describe it as a brand. Um, I call that the yellable why. So if I'm yelling 5 words across the street, a crowded street to you, is it gonna sound similar to what you're telling them on the marketing side? And because they've been using this product for so long, do those 2 things actually match each other? Um, I think that that kind of cohesiveness, um, really it helps on the product side as well, because you're able to think about it gives us a better lens to think about what features are the most important, how to even organize the information architecture of the product. Um, all of the little bits and pieces of microcopy. I started on the content side, so of course I'm going to nerd out on the microcopy in the product. Um, all those bits and pieces of text, do they not only describe what's about to happen, but do they sound like your brand? If you're playful and fun and your microcopy is boring in the product, there's just going to be a very obvious disconnect, especially as you know, as interconnected as we are today. People are going to be out describing your product to other people. You want them to do it in a way that reflects who you want to be.
And even in the UX and interaction design, if it is a playful brand and product and voice, the product itself needs to take into those considerations of how, not just with the copy, but also how do you interact with it. I think it's going to be an important one as well. Now, in more mature products, in larger organizations, there are brand marketers and there are product marketers, and they have two different jobs. Ultimately, they don't sit in the same department, even though they're both marketing the product or the brand. I've always found that there's been a disconnect where product marketers are really focused on a lot of the pricing and how the more detailed. Uh, do you find that there's a gap between the two? Do you work with both, or do you and find ways in which to bring them together? Let me put it this way: when you start a project and you identify that if you're there to work on the experience side and the product design side, and you recognize that there's a brand challenge or disconnect, how do you go about bringing that to light? And then, or do you have any tricks on how you get it across? Because it may not always be received well by one side or the other, because there are quite often such a big siloed departments.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. A lot of times, when I'm brought in, and I also see this not only between brand marketing and product marketing, but also between marketing and sales, right? Because sometimes sales is off doing its own thing as well. Um, so I mean, the best trick I found is just to be open with communicating between them, and I take the time to actually talk to different people in those departments, and make sure that we're thinking at least that I'm taking into account their perspective, right? So a lot of times I'll actually sit down with them and talk through what their strategy is and see how we can try to weave those different pieces together into something that's more cohesive.
And that's from more mature brands. Of course, startups will quite often have one marketer and quite one marketer or the product manager still doing it. Do you, if you get brought into a startup, do you have an easier go at being able to say these two are connected and being able to do the work on the both sides?
Absolutely. I mean, on the startup side, that's obviously much easier. The teams are smaller. You're able to get all the right people in the room really quickly. Um, So, yeah, often I mean, I'm typically working with Series A, B startups, so generally they're gonna be a smaller team. So it's a bit easier to get everybody on board in those kinds of scenarios. And, it's not even, like, saying, like, that we need to change the brand or anything along those lines. A lot of times I'm actually just taking the brand and injecting it into the product a bit more. So, most of the time I end up on the product side, and that's a bit of an easier conversation to have.
What have some of the biggest aha moments in bringing the two together, or some of the biggest disconnects where you've had to go in and connect them, and that you've over the years?
I think the biggest I'm trying to think of, like, a really, here's a good example. So I was working with this was an earlier stage company, so smaller, just really had started establishing their brand. They were going out and they were selling their new product, which was basically um, an e-commerce product that was bringing a lot of the features that Amazon back in the day had, but the smaller merchants didn't to them, specifically around analytics. They had spun up an MVP, had a very basic brand, and they were going out and selling it. What they were giving to their customers was a giant zip file dump every week of 100 different charts and graphs. And they came to us and they said, "Great, you're UX people. I need you to take these 100 charts and graphs and tell us how to basically create a filtering and sorting interface so they can find the correct one." Um, and my first instinct was, nobody's looking at 100 charts and graphs every week. Um, so we actually went and sat with these customers, the customers who were using them. I created a giant Kanban board of all the different charts and graphs, and I actually had them sort them from these are the most important to me to these are the least important to me. And I didn't care about any quantitative metrics of like these are the ones that shook out at the top and these ones at the bottom. What I cared about was their explanation of why some of them were important and why others were not. What we ended up learning was that what the merchants cared about most was they wanted to turn their one-time buyers into two-time buyers. They wanted repeat customers because it's cheaper, right? You don't have to spend the money acquiring a
Yes.
customer. So they wanted all of the metrics around which of my customers are most likely to become repeat buyers. And that inkling changed the entire product design from this is going to be a filterable, sortable thing. And eventually, the other graphs were in an analytics area for a deep dive for somebody who really wanted to get all the information. We created a very streamlined dashboard around here's your retention dashboard. Here are the customers we think are most likely to be retained. Here's what your retention metrics look like over time. And that turned one-time buyers into repeat buyers became their marketing message. It was their headline for years. They won a pitch competition on it, and then they were eventually acquired. But that little nugget on the product side ended up informing their messaging on the branding and marketing side of things
That's
for
cool.
years.
Now you talk about behavioral science in the way in which you do design for your products. What are some of the activities that may be unique to or workshops or ways in which you add that behavioral science take on the design work that you do that maybe others don't? that you think is a good thing for the people to, good thing for other product designers, I guess, to take into consideration that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's more about, I wouldn't say it's like a workshopping perspective, although, I love, one of my favorite workshops to run is actually user story mapping, where we're actually walking through step by step what behaviors somebody would actually take and using the verb phrases. And if you haven't read User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton, highly recommend. It's a great book. It's got a little bird on the front. Um, and not to be confused with user stories. That name it causes a lot of confusion. That's one of my favorites. I like to actually layer on top of user story mapping are hypotheses around where there might be areas of friction that slow people down. And slow is the acronym I like to use for struggles, lapses, obstacles, and workarounds in the product. So struggles, things they might run into often, can't find a certain button, IA is confusing, that sort of thing. Lapses, they forget to come back to the product. There are reasons they might leave and basically just turn out. Obstacles are like one time, I think of them like a big boulder in your path um, that they can't get around, usually in onboarding. And workarounds are things that they may take from the product and go use something else to actually get what they want. So copying metrics from a dashboard into Excel is a good example. So I like to layer that on top. A lot of the kind of like behavioral science things, I'm usually just trying to take those principles and apply them back into the product and how we think about the product. So kind of using those and thinking about how might we use, for example, the framing effect is a really good simple one, right? How are we framing things in the product, and how might we change that frame of reference and reframe it? So like one example of this is I was working on a product where in the dashboard there was a big button that said um, change plans. And you can imagine that if you log in and one of the first things you see is change plans, your instant reaction is, should I be downgrading my plan right now? Am I on too high of a plan? We just made a very simple reframe and changed that to upgrade. And that very simple change in the content and the wording made a significant difference on the number of upgrades versus downgrades. And then, of course, downgrades was more called out in a sub menu, but when you logged in, the first thing you saw was upgrades. And then your instant reaction is not, should I be downgrading? It's, maybe I should upgrade. Let's see what other plans there are here.
You mentioned with your frameworks, their onboarding. That's another interesting piece that I find can make or break a product. It's hard enough to get someone to download or to come over to your product. And I find that onboarding is quite often very, very under invested in. It is an afterthought. It doesn't get the same level of love that the actual product gets in its design and or the marketing. So you spend all this money creating this brand, you spend all this money to get people to try it out, and then you get, if it's a web app, maybe there's some popovers,
Yep.
that you quite often is not in the way in which you want to go. If it's a mobile app, quite often there's nothing. And if there is
Those little
something,
carousel style swipey things.
little swipe things, I think they're getting better a little bit, but nonetheless, I mean, ultimately, it's if you can create a product that you don't need onboarding, that's awesome, and that's a great, that's something to want to achieve. But ultimately, not everybody's going to be at that level, and I think that that the product design and that the onboarding needs to be taken into consideration. And I know that MVP, you're
My
rushing to
language,
market.
I love onboarding is my absolute favorite part of product design. Close second is microcopy, but number one is onboarding.
So, what would you say? Where would you put onboarding into the roadmap? Like at the end, when you see how it's all working, do you put it onto the plan at the beginning? Like, we need to take into this, because usually there's a rush to get it. Ship. So how would you say that you can emphasize the importance of onboarding to a client or product team that are rushed or and need to get it to market.
I mean, it's interesting that you brought onboarding up, because I also think of onboarding as that bridge between marketing and product as well, right? This is it's the moment where you're able to take what you've been telling them. This is the promise we're giving you, that the product's going to, we're promising you the product is going to do this, and you're going to walk them through and say, this is how we are going to show you this, the promise. This is where we're taking you. Let's take you through step by step to get some of those quick wins, so that you feel like you're making real progress towards the ultimate brand promise that you've sold them. And so you asked about how to win in the process. How do you convince a product team? That's always tough, right? It's often the forgotten about piece of the product design, or it gets slapped on at the very last second, and somebody's like, can't we just use a library for that and throw it in here? um so
Or FAQs, a link to the FAQs.
oh, let's link to the help docs.
Yes.
um so the the thing that I like to say is that your motivation is the highest when you're using a product when you sign up for it. You're excited. You've looked at this thing, you're like, I think this is really going to change the way that I do things. I'm excited about it. I'm ready to use it. I've hit the sign up button, I've converted, and now I'm in the product. And this is your moment to take advantage of that high level of motivation and to really springboard that into a loyal, excited user who's going to go out and shout it from the rooftops. This is the most amazing product that they've ever used. And onboarding is that moment where you can capture them and you can show them how you are going to actually accomplish what you've sold them in the product. So I don't only think of it as instructional, and it should be instructional, but at the same time, it's also still selling the product in a very subtle way.
Yeah, and I guess I was just thinking, there's agencies that do explainers, lots of them that do explainers. You could probably even create an agency that's specialized in onboarding in and of itself as a niche. A niche play, because it's that important. And I suspect another way that you could convince those of the importance and the investment into it is through some data. I imagine there's lots of data out there that shows, and case studies, that poor onboarding experience ultimately led to higher churn or higher incompletion rates. I still remember when Apple Music started, the onboarding had this weird bubbles of artists and genres that you had to move around, and it was it was not done by the product team. It was definitely done by a different team. It was such a weird thing, and that was years ago. But I still remember it being this barrier that it was forcing me to do. It was a very unintuitive way to pick your music. They were trying to be way too clever. Anyways, we talked. So that's onboarding. It is a big part of the brand. You're right. It's a bridge or an intersection of the two, and it needs to be considered more. And I think that's an important piece. Now, we'll just go through. Yes, and so some of the case studies. Let's talk some of your more exciting case studies or interesting problems that you solved that when you went in as well, that you thought it was one thing and maybe it became something different.
Ooh, I thought it was one thing and it became something different. All right, here's one. So we were working on a product that basically showed you competitors' ads. So you could say I'm Apple, I want to see Samsung's ads. I don't know. And you could see how much they're spending on different platforms. You could see what the ads actually look like, get all the competitive intel. And they came to us and they're like, yeah, I think we basically want to just create a feed. Like you basically follow your competitor brands, and I want to create a feed of all the new ads that they're coming out with or where they're changing up their spend and that sort of thing. And we were like, all right, that's pretty straightforward. Great. We start going through, we start the design process, and I keep asking questions and trying to understand, like, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And we got this nugget of, we have all of these big companies who are using our product, and they're all sharing seats. They buy one seat, there are 5 people using the product. Obviously, there are technological ways you can solve this. But from an experience perspective, we ended up taking that feed and flipping it, making it an inbox. So when somebody opens this up, my dashboard now says Katie's inbox across the top as my name, giant typography, and there are read and unread states. So it's much more annoying if you have a team of 10 people who are coming in. I've gone in, I've looked at all the alerts, and now they're all in an unread state that's small, and it looks like it's been read by somebody. It also feels like weird, like you're creeping in somebody else's inbox. So we ended up kind of changing that one interaction of we just want to see updates from a feed to an inbox just based on that one issue. So that was
And
an interesting one.
so did they increase their seat sales?
Yeah. People
So
were like, well, now we need to buy more seats for our team.
so that's not only behavioral, that's also psychological.
Yeah.
Designing something to make deliberately to feel uncomfortable for
right.
in not in a it's in not in a bad way. It's a good little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you don't, it felt, we presented somebody in user research and they were like, oh, it feels like, I'm in somebody else's email, which may not feel so comfortable when it's your coworker. So, and you also wouldn't get as like you wouldn't get as many like red flag notifications that these are new ads for whatever your competitor is.
So as we look to the future, I have what I think is this important intersection of product design and brand experience becoming more and more important, and I think going to be those that do it right, we're going to be more successful. Do you have any recommendations or guiding principles that you think are going to become more important for these products and brands to take on to become successful in the new way, in the new experience economy, as we like to call it here?
Yeah, I think, well, two things. I think on the product brand side of things, it's about really thinking about how to make that experience cohesive from beginning to end, and having and continuing that voice and the way that you're presenting the product and why it matters to somebody throughout the experience. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, as more and more products are inserting AI into their product, I think we all have to be careful not to become Clippy. Do you remember Clippy?
I actually just referred to Clippy 2 days ago. Yes. I would think because of the Microsoft outage, that's probably a bit strong.
Well, I mean, I feel like as we're getting more and more of these AI co-pilots, we're becoming more and more Clippy-like in our design. And I think that we're going to see a shift in how we're designing products, where AI is going to become a little bit more baked in the way that it used to be. I mean, people have had AI in their products for a very long
Yes.
time. It's just that with the new LLMs, things are a little bit different, and people are starting to really think of this as like a chat experience. And I mean, chat was cool, what, 5-10 years ago, where everybody had a chat bot. And I feel like
Yes.
we're almost reverting back to that phase. So I think we're going to start seeing a shift away from a co-pilot experience into something that's a little bit more baked in, where the companies are thinking more about what value am I giving to my customers, not just we're the new AI powered blank. And I think that spans both marketing and product too.
Yeah, it's true. The voice of the chatbot has to be taken into consideration, as it always has been. It's a little bit more risky now, in the sense that you have less control over where that voice can go with an LLM. It can go off the rails. I think there's also that co-pilot concept in product design. There's a place for it where it really makes sense. And one of the places that I think is where it works well right now in a co-pilot situation is in e-commerce, where you need to get a lot of folks that are running their e-commerce shops aren't technically advanced, don't know how to run reports, don't know how to make changes, and I'm seeing that that can be very, very helpful. But a lot of times it just gets in the way, and you have to now think, if your prompt isn't right, and now I have to think about how to re-engineer the prompt or try another prompt. I just read a study yesterday saying that the management of AI in the workplace for quality control is negatively impacting the gains that AI, generative AI specifically, was promised to them,
Interesting.
because you can't just ship it. I find, anything you're using, you got to triple check that it didn't insert some one weird little thing.
Oh, yeah. We've tried to spin up, chatbots on, GPT's, program, and we yeah, we got some really weird outputs sometimes.
We're working with them, but I think, and I don't think they'll have their place. But again, you've got to be, they have to be mindful and put in, not just stuck on top, not bolted on. It has to be done well.
Yep, absolutely.
And you're right; it's a perfect crossroads. You need to have the voice and tone of your brand in there, making sure that it's been trained to do that, as well as providing the functionality.
Yeah. I also think, like, sometimes I feel like they may get in the way of the actual value of the product. Like, some of these are getting bolted onto existing products, and I feel like sometimes the underlying value is there, and now it's being kind of hidden behind this, new kind of AI-powered chatbot that they're trying to add in here.
Are you finding that you're being asked to work with more of the generative AI around products in the last year and a half, when you come
Oh,
in?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the startup I mentioned earlier was in the ML space, so we've been doing AI-based products for a very long time. But it's definitely it's kicked up a notch where pretty much every client is using AI in some way, shape, or form.
And I think that's going to be the challenge of the next year for product managers, to, because they're going to get the word from the top, most likely, that they need to have AI into
Mhm.
something. And how do we get AI? And so trying to make it either push back and or find the right way to include it. So it's going to be an interesting product design thing to navigate.
Yep, absolutely.
So you are at Nurture, and you're a fractional product designer. So tell us where people can find you, and some of the stuff that you specialize in, and to take us out.
Yep, you can find me on nurture.com, or you can just hit me up on LinkedIn. And yeah, I specialize in working with Series A and B companies on their product design. I integrate directly into their teams and work with their product teams primarily.
And even if you're not in the product space, I recommend connecting with her on LinkedIn, because the stuff you'll learn from your vast and growing library. You're very prolific too, of content on carousels, is worth it alone. So thank you, Katie, for being my guest on this episode
So
too.
much.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. All right.
All
There you go.
right. We didn't get